So, well, now you know.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, I guess the first thing to do, my name is Diane Griffin. I am a programmer curator with the Wicked Queer Film Festival. And we are here to speak with various personalities from the film I'm Gonna Make You Love Me, which is a documentary about Brian, who actually, Brian, why don't you introduce yourself and then we'll kind of go from there.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Belovich, and I am the notorious subject of this film, I'm Gonna Make You Love Me, directed by Karen Bernstein.
And with you is?
Hi, I'm Jim, and I keep Brian on course. I'm his husband, and you've seen us both in the film.
Yes, that's right. And Karen?
Hi, I'm Karen Bernstein. I lost myself. Oh, there I am. Okay. I'm Karen Bernstein, and I produced and directed the film.
And
To Make You Love Me.
and is your name pronounced Nevie?
It's Nevie.
Nevie.
Nevie. And I'm the editor.
Okay.
And the producer.
And the producer.
And last but not least, we have Michael Musto.
Yes, I'm a longtime journalist, and I became friends with Brian when he thought he was Tish Gervais, the queen of the nightlife, and I got to know the whole backstory, which was that Brian grew up a flamboyant boy, later on transitioned, became an army wife in Germany, and actually passed. Her husband knew that she was trans, but nobody else knew.
Mm-hmm.
I came to New York and partied it up and was fabulous and was a chanteuse and party girl, and then realized Brian was his true identity and became Brian again, and has been Brian ever since, with Jim making sure that everything stays on course.
That's quite a story. That's quite a story arc.
It's
Quite
a
a
story
life.
of the movie. You really have to see the movie.
Yeah.
It's an incredible story.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully people have seen the movie. I don't know if we have anybody actually watching. I think we're the only ones on the Zoom, but hopefully some of the people who might be watching on Facebook have seen the movie. It's a fabulous film. I really enjoyed it. Let's see, where should we start? So Karen, can you tell us a little bit about the beginnings of the idea of the film?
Well, really, the beginning of the film for me began in 1992 when I first met Brian. He was invited to my birthday party by a woman I was dating at the time. And I met him there and really didn't know that much. I think she may have mentioned that he was transitioning or had transitioned. It was vague. Mm-hmm. And then I was asked by her, and I assume Brian by extension, to drive him to get his driver's license. He had never, it seemed really odd to me, but he had, reached the age of, how old were you at that point, Brian? Like 30 something, and still owned a car, but didn't have a driver's license. I thought, oh, okay. Didn't think that much about it. So I proceeded to take him to his driver's test, in Red Hook, Brooklyn. And we got incredibly lost. And it was this complete, I hate to overuse these words, but it was an odyssey getting lost in Red Hook, Brooklyn at the time. No GPS or map even. And Brian proceeded to tell me the story of his life, or of this portion of his life, of Tish, really, Tish in Brooklyn. And it was fascinating. And I was just completely, intrigued. And I thought at that moment, I'm going to make a film about this someday. But then it was really this process, which I think a lot of documentary filmmakers go through, which is, okay, you're waiting for the moment to make the film. There has to be a kind of entrance into the story that makes sense so that it doesn't become just a kind of memory play. And in fact, Brian had done his one man, one woman, one person theatrical interpretation of his life called Boys Don't Wear Lipstick. And I thought, okay, well, that's kind of taking care of that story insofar as the theatrical, promise of it. So I was always looking for something, some way to tell the story. And then 2014, I believe, is when the date of the first real interview footage that we have. At that point, I had already been working with Nevie as an editor and knew, trusted her insofar as any kind of filmmaking process. And there was an event in Brian's life which was quite unusual, and it sort of happened quite by accident. It was a result of social media, but somebody from his past had reached out and completely misunderstood his Facebook page. He has a Facebook page completely devoted to Tish, which he can tell you more about, sort of repository for photographs of Tish. And somebody from his past had seen that through Facebook and was completely blown away because she had always assumed, in fact, what she had thought is that Tish had transitioned to Brian. So it was kind of like a comedy of errors in a way. And I thought, okay, well, this is the moment. This is the time to make the film. And I don't know whether I actually talked to you about it, Nevie, or not at that time, but I just started.
I think you,
yeah.
It was right after you had gathered some of that footage. I think you'd also even started some type of pulling together in a teaser.
Yeah, a trailer, and
it was based around that
whole incident, which actually became, as this happens with documentary films especially, evolved over time into quite a different other film. It became, through Nevie's incredible editing and just a series of other creative decisions, we actually left that story completely behind. It's not even mentioned.
I was going to say, I didn't see
in
that.
the film. Yeah. So it's been a real, talk about odysseys. There really has been this kind of incredible trajectory insofar as the film itself is concerned.
Sure. Let's see. Ryan, when did the idea of the film first get broached with you? Was it right away? On the car drive, or?
We talked about it.
Oh, I'm not hearing. Brian, I think you're
muted?
muted.
He's
Okay,
muted.
there we are. I'm unmuted now.
Okay.
So the conversation in the car was quite a while ago. I didn't know at that time that Karen, has talked about that some point she would like to maybe make a film about my story. Only to recently I learned that. But the conversation about doing the documentary came about when we got that email from my former sister-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in
That was 2014.
2014, yeah. And it was kind of this like out of the blue kind of experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I called Karen. I was like, oh my, you never believe who contacted me. But the great thing about that email was that, once the shock wore off, my ex-sister-in-law sent me this amazing, loving, caring, supportive.
Yeah.
Actually, when I read it, I burst into tears. I was so moved by the acceptance that I had received from someone I, hadn't really had any contact with since when did I break up with my husband? 84?
I was gonna say, okay, 84 or 85, right?
Yeah. So we're talking like 20, maybe 20 years. And so it was really incredible. And so that was sort of the impetus for the kernel of, I was also in the middle of writing my memoir at this point also.
And as I remember it,
Oh, what?
there was an interest in like two things. Whatever happened to my former husband, and then something that struck a little closer to me was if you were married before and never not married, unmarried, are you now a bigamist? Even though it was sort of married under false premises, the state still, it was registered as a marriage. So I was kind of in limbo because we married in 13. And so it was around that time that it was like, well, wait a minute. Am I even a legal spouse?
Right. And so were you at that time?
Legal?
Yeah.
I'm guessing so. I mean, the question was never really answered.
We answered eventually. We contacted my ex, and I actually had contact with him. We approached him about being included in the documentary, and he didn't want to be involved. But we did talk about the marriage was annulled, eventually, the first marriage, so I'm not a bigamist. Although I guess it's up for legal debate whether I was or wasn't. I don't know. I mean, that's a whole other conversation that I never really thought of.
That's the first time anyone's ever asked that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the first time anyone's ever asked that question.
What do you mean? I've been asking it for years.
Trying to give Brian props. That's a good question.
Honest woman.
I wonder if you're Brian, if you're the only person who was married as a woman to a man and then married as a man to a man.
Oh, Guinness Book of World Records.
Oh, cool.
Here we go.
Pretty darn unusual experience. I've never heard of it before.
Well, I was certainly one of the first, I don't know, same gender, or I don't know. I mean, I didn't have reassigned to surgery. My gender was assigned male at birth. I mean, it was a legal marriage when people were trying to get married back then. I just did it. I mean,
You were one of the first people that I knew of who, in fact, you were the first I ever heard of who detransitioned, which means you had transition male to female, then detransition back to male. Now we look on YouTube, there's a lot of people telling their stories, also the other way around, where they're female to male to female. And I think you really helped open the door for people to be honest about such a thing. You would think the trans community might not be thrilled with that because what you're saying is me being a trans woman wasn't really right for me, but they really have no problem with it because I think the entire community wants people to be happy as individuals and they know that each story is unique. Your story was you weren't comfortable being Tish. You had some great times as Tish, but you ultimately felt hollow and knew that Brian was the right thing for you. And when you returned to being Brian, you also cleaned up addiction problems and dealt with HIV and all kinds of things that are all in the movie. And found a new husband who I think is better for you than the last one.
I would agree. Thank you.
I approve.
Yay.
I had a question just for a second there, and it got away from me. So actually, I think I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. I guess, Michael, how did you first meet Tish?
We were both on the nightlife scene, which in the mid-'80s was so insanely over the top. It was getting so much publicity, partly because of people like me. I had a column in the Village Voice, and Tish and I would sing at reviews put on by Gabriel Rotello at the Limelight nightclub, and we sang at a gay pride event, and just hit it off. We were thick as thieves. And I actually outed Tish as trans, not realizing that she didn't necessarily want to be outed as trans. You forgive me, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. And
It was a great story. Tell the story.
You go ahead, because in your book.
You tell it. You tell it. You wrote it better.
It was about you were sitting down at an event and your dress was tight and you said, I hope this doesn't cut my dick off.
No, I was gonna have my gender confirmation surgery in Carnegie. Was it Carnegie Hall or Alice Tully Hall? I was sitting there. My pantyhose was cutting the circulation off my penis, and I was sitting between Michael and film director Milos Forman. And I turned to Michael and I said, I think I'm going to have my surgery right here in this seat if this doesn't end anytime soon.
And Michael, you had no idea at that point?
Myrna Lloyd.
She was always saying quotable things. I always thought she was dying for me to write her up. So to me, it was like she was feeding me a line. I was shocked years later to read in her book, in his book, Brian's book, that he didn't care for me going there. But basically, we called you the girl with something extra, which you liked. So I figured you were pretty open about your identity at that point. And I never imagined that there would come the day when Brian would say to me, brace yourself, I'm going back to being Brian. My jaws all dropped to the ground, my chins dropped to the ground. My head spun around. I was like, this is the best gossip in a long time. But I also was very fascinated and ultimately very happy because I realized that it was the right thing. And I think for a young trans person, so maybe you are too young sometimes to transition because you really have to be 1,000% sure that this is right for you. Because sometimes there is no turning back in certain ways.
Right, yeah.
That place. Also with Trump taking away trans rights, Trump is taking away trans people's rights every moment. So you're entering a world.
That's true, and it's like
you're considered a second-class citizen. However, if it's right for you, and you know that you're not, that your real gender is not the gender you were biologically born with, absolutely, you are trans.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that I really appreciated about the movie is that even anytime that Tish was discussed as as a trans person, it was never presented that Brian felt like that was a true nature. It was always like the unhappiness and the discomfort was there. There was never like a question. Did you ever really question whether you were a woman, or was it just like something that you did in the name of, I don't know, why don't you describe for me what your thought was about it, what your heart was about it?
In other words, did you feel you were Tish or you were playing a character named Tish?
Well, I've said in other interviews that I don't really know what a woman feels like, and I didn't come to that conclusion on my own. My friend, one of my colleagues, Kate Bernstein, talks about how, which I always loved about Kate. She never claimed born in the wrong body or feeling like a woman. Because she said famously that she would never know what a woman felt like because she was not a woman. She was a trans woman, and that's different. But so I know that the common response for people and the common thread of well, I felt like a woman, and I just felt feminine. I just had a extremely feminine side. I had a feminine spirit, and I have a masculine spirit. I think at that point I was more inclined to pay homage to my feminine side, and based on the external factors growing up and messages and messaging and people constantly telling me, misgendering me and always saying, oh, well, you'd be so pretty as a girl. They used to say that. You'd be so pretty as a girl. Have you ever thought about being a girl? And, what beautiful eyelashes, I did a talk the other day on YouTube for the Tell Queer Stories, and I remembered and I mentioned talking about like the first time that happened to me, and I remember my father saying to me, like, what are you, a queer, or what are you, a fat, like, so like those kind of messages, they really sink in your DNA, and you really absorb them on a very, not so conscious, but on a very deep unconscious level. So, I think that had a lot to do with my decision making.
I would have to disagree with Kate Bernstein, just for the record. Trans women are women, trans men are men. They do know what women and men feel like. I don't want to get into J.K. Rowling territory and act as if a trans woman is not really a woman and doesn't know what a woman feels like.
Well, I think
I have to agree with Michael on that one too.
Yeah, I think that she was saying that she specifically wouldn't know.
Right.
Yeah.
I think she was.
Not that trans women, I'm not saying that trans women don't feel like women.
Right.
I'm saying that, using her as an example, that stuck out for me, that she said that she wouldn't really know, because her assigned gender at birth was not female. So that's what I think she meant about her specific. I'm not saying making a blanket statement. I don't want to get into that controversy
Right.
about who's a woman, who's not a woman. My feeling is you're whoever you say you are. And I'm the last person in the world that's going to pass judgment on anyone's choices. Now, I will say this, while I have the opportunity, a lot of judgment has been passed on me for the choices that I've made. My friends are very supportive, and some people in the community, but I wrote a fantastic book. This is a fantastic movie. We have not received the type of support from the so-called powers that be in other festivals. We just haven't, and there's still a lot of gatekeeping around this issue. So I think that
Well, we are very proud to have this movie, and
thank you. I'm so thrilled that Wicked Queer decided to be brave enough to show this film, because it's not the du jour of the day, trans narrative.
right. Detransition stories can be uncomfortable. I'm wondering.
Yeah.
Now, you said you have been embraced and stuff. Have you gotten any blowback at all for? Maybe Karen can answer this one. Blowback at all for presenting a detransition story? Has there been any, anything in the public sphere? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and Nevie, you should pipe in too, but my intention was always to make, I come from a long tradition of making biographical documentaries. I worked at American Masters, which is a series on PBS for years. And, I think that my goal was to make a human story. It wasn't to make any, I knew from the outset that I really didn't want to make a political tract. I didn't want to support any one side or another. I wanted to do what I feel, a documentary artist should do, which is to tell the human side of the story. That was always my goal, as I think it was with, and to be honest, when we didn't get major blowback, but we got a little, and I don't want to name names, and then a little bit more at around the time of our premiere. I was told by somebody who was kind of vying to be my sales rep. It was an interesting moment, because he was both encouraging me to take him on as a sales rep and also discouraging me about the film and its potential on the LGBTQ circuit. So on the one hand, it was the weirdest meeting I've ever had, where he was saying, you should actually make money from these festivals. And I was like, wow, I've never heard of that before. You know, I mean, if a festival could pay my way on the plane, that was always like a big deal, you know? And he said, no, you can make money from that. And then at the same time, he was like, you're never going to get to San Francisco. If you get into Frameline, they won't put you at the Castro. And, you know, this was like this big deal that he was relating to me. And it took me about a week to let that sink in. I think I told Nevie about it. I don't even know if I told Brian.
No, you never told me
really
about it.
uncomfortable, weird thing. So he was saying, yeah, go ahead and try, but they probably won't let you in. And then I started to hear more along those lines. Nothing, I mean, nobody's ever written, well, we got one bad review, but I think that was just a racist, bigot, people hater in
Have you
general.
submitted it to NewFest and to Outfest?
Well, we were out of the, it's sort of difficult to explain, but we premiered within the same 3-month period as NewFest, I guess, which sort of, it's one or the other. The way that the festival world works, you kind of have to make decisions. You can't premiere, for instance, at Sundance and Toronto at the same time. Does that make sense? And then we're like a year.
You premiered at Docs
late.
Fest. You premiered at Docs Fest.
At Doc
Doc
NYC. And
Well,
so that
how
sort
about
of,
the LA Outfest? Could you be part of that, or is that too late?
I don't know about, well, we can talk about that later. But I was, you know, the one place that I really, really wanted to show was Frameline. And we didn't get into that, which is just to this day, you know, I just don't understand it, to be honest. I mean, I have great faith in this film and it will get its proper due. It's done really well on, you know, through the South by Southwest virtual platform on Amazon Prime. I'm very proud of it, but I am a little saddened by my own community, to be honest. Nevie, do you have anything you want to?
I guess I always wanted the film to be beyond gender. I wanted to just move outside of that. You know, I've had my own gender struggles, and I didn't actually really realize that I did until making this movie. And so I wanted it to just be beyond that. I wanted it to go bigger, and I didn't want it to be like this. There's a line in the movie where Brian is talking about Tish and how she felt like something was just wrong inside. She didn't quite understand it. And it was just huge for me that that's how our trans brothers and sisters feel. And I just don't want to deny anyone that feeling. And so that's where I wanted to go with it. Like if Tish felt that way about being Tish and wanted to go back to Brian, but that we have to recognize that there are individuals that feel that in the body that they're, you know, assigned with. And I just don't want to put that on anyone. So it was.
And at the same time, you don't want to take away, I mean, I think the blowback I got from people, you know, who I am close to was that, you know, this is such a fragile time for people who are transitioning in terms of getting societal acceptance. It's really, you have to strike this balance. You have to show the positive aspects as well as the negative aspects. And I said, that's all very well and good, but it's not the film that we wanted to make.
I didn't want to make a political film either.
Yeah.
Right.
I think somebody else should do that, but
yeah, I ultimately, I learned in this film that love, and growing up in a family, that love just isn't enough. You need to be loved and accepted, no matter what that is. So that's what I was hoping to put forth.
Yeah, I was a little concerned because I've seen some very, very kind of hair trigger sensitivities in the trans community, and I was wondering if this kind of a story would provoke somebody or trigger somebody, and it sounds like it really hasn't, which I'm actually really reassured by.
I haven't seen or heard any of it. But I do know, I do get the sense that people are afraid to push for it and promote it. There is a fear around it, and I don't think it's warranted.
I don't either, because
I think it's a story about love, and I just don't understand why you cannot just push that forward.
right. It's love of self too.
Yes, exactly.
Like listening to your inner voice, and I think that that's the through line that is what I most appreciate about the film.
I appreciate that. I'm glad that you got that, because I just think that that has to be the through line. And I think most people who are afraid of it actually haven't seen it and are judging it before really taking in the full import of what we were trying to say.
Well, people tend to have contempt prior to investigation.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's been my whole life. I mean, one of the things that people don't really know about this film, and I don't think it's even been talked about at all, is that it was so difficult for me to be my authentic self. At the time, I thought I was being my authentic self. This is a story that is a pro-trans narrative, because I talked in the film explicitly about how difficult it was for me to be a trans woman in a period in history in the 70s and the 80s when so many of so it was just almost impossible for, you know, I have very few friends from that time period that are alive. So I think rather than focus on like, oh, I'm uncomfortable because this isn't the thing that I, you know, want to hear about trans women, really, that was a huge factor in my comfort level in trying to make decisions that I could, you know, live with. So, you know, if anything, you know, let's think of, that's another way to think about this. You know, it was not easy. It's still not easy. And we've made so much progress. And I'm so proud of all the work my trans brothers and sisters have achieved. But that didn't happen overnight.
No, and
we still have a long way to go. And if we're going to be, our feathers are going to be a little ruffled, because this isn't, you know, the story that represents everyone. I mean, we're in an abyss.
But I do think it represents everyone. Who doesn't want to be loved and accepted? I don't think you should say that.
We're talking about. I think we're talking about, like, you know, some people's reaction that might be.
Yeah.
Well, I think, you know, I think if I can say one more thing, and this is really important, I think that Brian and Tish and actually Michael Musto are two, I guess, of the most brave people in this community I know. And, you know, I'm pretty old at this
What about
point.
Michelle?
Michelle.
My other.
Yeah. Right. Okay, whatever. The doppelgangers.
But this movie has two transitions. What more do you want? And Brian, you're so right. In the 70s and 80s, so many trans women were forced to do sex work, which was very dangerous in a lot of ways, not only because of communicable diseases, but you were dealing with very vicious pimps and sometimes psychotic customers. And society didn't say, oh, you're trans, we're going to give you an Emmy Award and we're going to make you a CEO. That might not even be happening now. But back then, especially, trans women were pigeonholed in a very dangerous manner for their livelihood.
Absolutely. I want to also talk, I want to touch a little bit on the period footage. I think that's like one of the great aspects of this film is, like, you're not just, I think in a lot of cases, this story would be told in retrospect, and there wouldn't be a lot of in this case, there's a lot of archival footage. There wouldn't be a lot of good way to go back and tell that part of the story too. Can you talk about your experience with finding and using that film, that video?
Well, we should speak very specifically about Nelson Sullivan's footage, and you say his name, because our film would be, I don't know if we would have a film, and it would certainly be different if we didn't have his footage. I mean, it made our film, I think. It made Tish come alive. We felt her, we saw her, we heard her. It just, to me, it's other than experiencing Jim and Brian now together, I love that footage. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, a lot of it's great. And Michael shows up in some of that footage too.
Oh, and he has so much, he has his own,
God.
he has his own trove of footage that we didn't use. And Michael's got Nelson followed Michael around all the time too.
That's the next film. The next film is going to be about Michael and Albert Crudo. And I mean, you really are, I think, probably the most populated part of Nelson's films, Michael, which really attests to your friendship, I'm sure, but also your popularity during the time. You were omnipresent. Some of the funniest footage.
We should explain who Nelson was. It was this wonderful
that was my
gentleman who just had this clunky camera. It
was huge. It was
before there were cell phones. You couldn't hold up a
20
phone.
pounds.
Before there was internet, before there was YouTube.
He was doing selfies way before everyone too. It was amazing.
And we would talk every day, and I would say where I was going that night. He would say where he was going, and we would coordinate where he would follow me. He would follow me to my parents' house for the holidays. He would follow me with my band to Boston for a gig, and he covered the minutia. He was like the John Cassavetes of downtown. So he is the one who has this treasure trove. He is long past, unfortunately, but he left a treasure trove of documentation of a period when RuPaul and Sylvia Miles and all of us were running around.
There's footage of early RuPaul. It was amazing.
And he never would have anticipated that one day after his death, there'd be something called YouTube. And his work is now out there, and it's influencing a whole new generation.
I would just lose days of editing trying to just look and search for certain things and just watch and watch and watch. And he was so captivating.
I hope that on the DVD cut, you know, Tish and Brian worked with Everett Quinton. Tish met Fellini. Tish was in a movie with Carol Shea, the policewoman who was in Playboy. You could do a whole montage on the director's cut. I hope you do it.
Oh, I love that one little clip from a show. You were in a show playing a sex worker.
Yeah,
That was you.
Q&A.
Yes, Q&A with.
That was actually after I had transitioned back.
Oh, interesting.
Drag. But I had actually worked on that corner in real life, and that was kind of a real trip, being in that.
That was a feature film.
I had actually got into cars on that corner where there I was now as a drag queen playing a part of a trans sex worker where I'd actually worked, and with Nick Nolte and the amazing Sidney Lumet. It was mind blowing for me.
Yeah. The more I hear about it, that's a pretty amazing experience right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would really, in addition to Nelson Sullivan, there's very few times in my life where the subject of a documentary that I was making can produce such an incredible archive. Usually you have to budget in for an archival film researcher when you do documentary films. And I had one, and he was also the subject of the film. He's meticulously preserved and collected and, scanned and uploaded, his footage with Jim's help, obviously, more recently.
Well, and derision at times, because, it's like, Brian, you're going to need a really big tomb to fit all this stuff in it. He had dresses and outfits coming out of closets. Like, oh, I wore this 50 years ago.
Yeah, he still has his wedding dress.
Yeah.
We desperately tried to figure out how to use it in the film, and it just didn't work. But yeah.
And we should still. That's
one of the amazing things about Nelson's footage is nobody ever saw this except for ourselves. He would follow me around for a night. The next day, he would hand me a videotape of the previous night. He never had screenings. Nobody else saw it except the people in the videos. So we were being ourselves and being unself-conscious and cutting up for the camera, just having fun. knowing no one's going to see this. That's why it's so good. Because when people
Yeah.
did finally see it, they were like, wow, this is really fun.
They weren't really, yeah, that's true. They weren't really overperforming.
So
For the
do we,
camera. They were just being themselves.
we hear
But
Nelson
for the camera, we loved having the camera in our face, even though we thought, well, no one's ever going to see this.
when Tish was like rewinding the film, was that Nelson yelling at Tish?
Yes, yes. That's not a comic book. You can't do that. I think there was only like one other copy. It was so precious. I love that, just for people to recognize that how precious VHS tapes were.
I kept them all.
You have them, really?
Yeah, I kept the whole
Oh, do
collection.
you?
That camera
There's
was
not all of them on YouTube. I have some that are not on YouTube.
Yeah. Oh, really? Ooh,
Ooh.
Michael.
All of the
I love that Karen and I just both peeked up. We're like, whoa.
Oh, really? You know what the one I love the most, I'm sure we're totally veering off track, but and I was desperately trying to work this into our film, of course, but is you, Michael, and I think it's Albert, right? At the World Trade Center, and you're doing this wonderful shtick where you're sort of moving around the sculpture that used to be there in the middle. It was like the big giant box or something like that. And you dish every single popular culture figure of the time. And it's like the dishiest, funniest shtick you have ever seen.
That was different. I actually wrote that script. With Nelson, it was normally off the cuff, not scripted. But that was one instance where
You were, okay.
It was a scripted piece that we did.
Brilliant. It's brilliant. But
Albert
so we have to.
Moody by the end. He wanted to just end it all. Nelson captured Albert's meltdown on camera. Nelson didn't miss a trick. He knew exactly where to put the camera. He really was a downtown Cassavetes.
He was so ahead of his time. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
James is asking about your Tarnation inspiration.
Yeah, I noticed that chat question too.
Yeah.
Oh, I
I
totally
think
forgot about James.
Yeah.
Are there Facebook questions too?
I don't know. Is anybody
I'm keeping an eye on the Facebook chat and the chat. I just don't want to butt in.
I just noticed James' question though.
Yeah, I'm putting questions in the chat just so I
Okay.
can interrupt people.
All right, let me just read it in so everybody hears it. Karen has mentioned Tarnation as an inspiration. Can she talk a little about how she sees this film in relation?
Tarnation, yeah. I think when I came to Nevie in 2014 with this footage, which I had so irascibly shot. I mean, it's just, I'm getting better. At least my footage is in focus now. That's a good point. And I shot this footage, and I knew that I had no money. I knew that I couldn't afford a real crew for a while until this thing got made. And I said, as I shot this, if life hands you lemons, make lemonade. I thought I really admired the film Tarnation, which is a documentary by, now I'm forgetting his name. What is his name?
Jonathan Coet.
Jonathan Coet.
Jonathan Coet.
Oh, right, Jonathan Coet, who I'd met at South by Southwest, or he'd come to Austin at one point. And I totally love that film. And I thought, well, there's an aesthetic born of that film that I also really like. And it's not slick, and it's just utilizing what you have before you in a very interesting, it's making into an art form that has no apologies with it. And I love that because I knew that this film was going to be using Nelson's footage and a lot of footage that would seem out of date. As Janet Pearson from South by Southwest, she said, your film is really delightfully low res, which I thought was a nice way of putting it.
It was.
And it is,
raw.
Raw.
It's raw.
Yes, and that's why you hire people like Nevie, because to make sense. Like making alphabet soup or something.
And I love old footage and archival. I just geek out over it. So give it to me. I love it.
She didn't like my footage, though.
I like in focus footage.
Yes, when it's in focus.
Yeah.
And I struggled with that. That's a very long answer to your question.
Well, I think what I loved about Jonathan's film is that there's this raw truth to it, which I totally connected to your film too. It's you know, it's a very, very honest story, and I show it to my students, and they're really kind of surprised. And I feel like your film is one of those films that I would make my students watch, because there's something about the real visceral power of documentary that gets over slickified, you know, where
Yeah.
I'm not going to mention certain films, but there's certain films that come across our desk at the film festival, and they're fantastic subjects, but they're just so slick that you feel like, oh, okay, this is produced by MTV, or this is like, you know, and it takes away this kind of raw urgency, I feel. At least that's sort of my take. I will always go for something that comes through.
I think Brian was so relatable and captivating and likable that our footage could be raw, and why not use that to our advantage? And I felt like Brian himself, just people were going to latch on, and I thought we could use it. I mean, some films you couldn't, but I think we could with ours.
Yeah, you had a subject that like really comes across.
Exactly. It's about the subject matter and the feeling and the rawness of it, and I feel like we had to use it to our advantage. And I think we did.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. Is there anything that needs to be said that hasn't to this point?
Where do I begin?
You know, one thing that did come out today is that, yeah, I do think that more people should be screening it and seeing it, and it should be more widely just out there, and that people shouldn't be afraid. This is not a story to be afraid of. It should be embraced and loved. And I'm having a hard time understanding why people aren't stepping up and stepping forward and screening it. So I do think Wicked Queer for that.
Yes, thank you very much. And, you know, I should say, though, as somebody who gets all of these, you know, messages, and I mean, a lot of people have requested the film. A lot of people have written asking about the film. I think because of COVID and the shutdown of cinema, essentially. It's a strange time, and people are not necessarily willing to take chances on things that they don't know about. But we're going to make a strong push now on the streaming circuit. And, you know, we have all the international rights. We have the domestic US and North American rights. They're all out there. So it's at this point. And what I'm most actually thrilled about is the educational potential of this, because I think there's a giant film. In fact, if broken down into 10-minute segments, could work really well in graduate seminars as well as high school classrooms. We'd have to edit a little bit of Tish's past in order to make the high school classroom, but I think it will work in components like that, sort of nodules. So I'm very optimistic about it. It's been, we got a lot of requests to enter festivals and then didn't hear a lot from there. So I don't know whether it's a particularly busy time.
I mean, but I would imagine that the festival circuit too, I mean, it's just a hard
It's a
time.
weird time. Yeah.
I would add, you know, earlier we were talking about people maybe being triggered, and whenever I watch the film, I'm triggered a little bit to kind of get up and move, because I find the music is really compelling and very exciting, and I love the sound editing is just so, it's really incredible.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think if you get some prominent trans women like maybe Janet Mock and Laverne Cox to endorse the film, you would use that to market it so people aren't afraid of the narrative, which might not fit into politically correct. I transition, you know, you detransition. But I think if you have prominent trans people, say, this is okay, don't be afraid of this movie.
Yeah.
We're all different. This is an important story to be told. This doesn't impinge on anyone else's transhood.
No.
I think that would really help the film.
I think Michael's right. I think that, you know, this is everyone's story, and you know, you know, I've written a screenplay also based on my play, which I have been sort of retooling. And I mean, Hollywood, you know, there's everyone screaming and shouting and jumping up and down. And where's the trans characters? Where's the gay characters? Why can't the gay people play gay people? Why can't the, you know, this is a project that has a plethora, I mean, of like gender, non-conforming, conforming, gay, bi, you know, cisgender. I mean, it's just a cornucopia of, you know, amazing three-dimensional, fully realized trans characters. So, you know.
Just waiting for Scarlett Johansson.
Waiting for what?
Scarlett Johansson. I'm kidding.
Scarlett Johansson. ScarJo.
Here's your big chance.
No, I want Halle Berry or no one.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I see the resemblance.
Oh, God.
Oh, Lord.
No.
Circle back, Diane. Circle back.
We're going to circle back. I don't know how to circle back. This has gone so far. So far we have come this hour or so. And I just would like to say that I have enjoyed meeting and talking with all of you. I hope that the people who are watching us on Facebook or who now or later really get something out of it. And if you get a chance to see this film, you really need to. It's a great film, very entertaining, very important story about, you know, yeah, being true to yourself and about love. And I just want to thank all of you for bringing it to us.
We should say the title.
Oh yes, let's say the title again, because I'm Gonna Make You Love Me is the title of this film, and it will.
Thank you, Diane.
Oh, thank you, Diane.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The T-shirts are available on somebody's website.
Yes.
I
Mhm.
think
They're
Maryland's
available.
website. Thank you, Diane, for having us.
Thank you very much.
So thrilled to be in my home state of Massachusetts.
Oh, you're here.
Thrilling for me to be. I really, really wanted to be here so badly, and
I know.
thankful to you and everyone involved in Wicked Queer, and it's a great festival. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been so much fun to just say Wicked Queer.
Wicked
It
Queer.
is.
Wicked Queer.
Wicked Queer.
And Brian, your memoir is called Transfigured.
Yes, my memoir is called Transfigured: My Journey from Boy to Girl to Woman to Man. It is available in many, many small bookstores, but also on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can find it. There's an audio version, which is really a blast because the guy that did the reading, he does all the characters, which is really,
Oh, awesome.
really fantastic.
Oh.
The audio book.
Well, I'm definitely going to pick it up and read it. I have a degree in creative nonfiction, so it's right up my alley on
Wow.
a bunch of levels. Anyway, thank you all.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
Right, safe. Have fun.
Thank you, James. Thank
Bye.
you, Giuseppe. Thank you.
Love
so
y'all.
much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.